everyone! Welcome to the Jayda InStitches show. Today we are going to make a basket with a removable lid. This is a highly requested project here on the channel, and we can see why. Baskets are fantastic. We've made many of them here on the channel. They're great for storage, they're great for keeping things neat and tidy and out of the way, but adding a lid just makes everything that much tidier. I feel that this is the perfect size for a keepsake basket. You can keep all kinds of odds and ends in here, but it's not so big that you're going to lose stuff at the bottom. You can still kind of see what's in a basket by looking in it. And that lid fits perfectly. It's got a little easy to grab knob at the top. I think a whole pile of these on a shelf or maybe across the back of the work table would just look so cute. They're perfect size for keeping all sorts of craft supplies, maybe your kids' toys, or just all those funny little odds and ends that tend to pile up and often end up in a drawer. I highly recommend this basket with a lid. And today we are going to make this project using Lion Brand Woolies Thick and Quick. We'd like to thank Lion Brand Yarns for sponsoring today's video, and we're going to link to them down in the description box and the pinned comment below. Woolies Thick and Quick is a size 6 super bulky weight yarn, and it's a wool acrylic mix. In fact, it's 80% acrylic and 20% wool. So there's not a whole lot of wool in this, but just enough to give it a nice texture, a nice bit of a sheen, and a little added strength. It's still washable, by the way, in the washing machine. This particular yarn, being thick, means that we only need to use one strand to make a fairly sturdy basket, and that does make this a quick project. I really love this little basket, and I love the color. I used spiced apple for this project, but I feel like with a couple of color tweaks, you could get a completely different feel. If you wanted to make this look more like an acorn, for example, you could use oatmeal in the bottom and the spiced apple for the lid. Or if you wanted it to look a bit like a pumpkin, you can use the pumpkin colorway for the majority of the basket and the lid, and just cilantro for the little nub or the little knob on the top of the lid, and you would totally have a pumpkin looking basket. There's a lot of fun to be had with all the different colorways of the Woolies Thick and Quick, and you can pop over to their website at your leisure and check out all those colors. That said, let's grab our hooks, we'll grab our bowls of Woolies Thick and Quick, we'll head on over to the craft table, and we will stitch up a very useful lidded basket together. For our baskets, I recommend 2 skeins of a regular sized Woolies Thick and Quick in your preferred color, or 1 bonus bundle like I have here. You're going to need approximately 170 yards of a super bulky size 6 yarn altogether. And Woolies Thick and Quick is a wool acrylic blend. It's 80% wool, 20% acrylic. You want a pair of scissors, a yarn needle, and a relatively large hook. We are using an 8mm hook today, also known as an L or an 11. This will give us a slightly tighter stitch tension because we want our baskets to be on the stiff side. If you have trouble getting a tight tension, then go down a hook size to a 6.5mm or a 7mm. If it is too tight because you naturally have a tight tension, then you can go up a hook size to a 9mm. And once you've got all that together, we can get started. We're going to begin with a cinch circle, and we're going to start with the basket, and we'll do the lid later. Remember, you're working all of your first row's stitches over top of your little short tail, and this is what is going to allow us to cinch the circle shut when we're done. Row 1 is 8 single crochet, all worked into that circle. So take your time. Working with a super bulky weight yarn can feel a little different than working with regular yarn weights. So just take your time. You want 8 single crochet, all worked into that cinch circle, making sure that they're all worked over top of that little short tail. Once you have 8 single crochet, grab that little short tail and pull it gently, but with, some firmness until you feel it kind of stop running, and that will completely cinch your circle shut. Because we're working in the round, we are not joining rows with a slip stitch. We are not chaining one to begin the next row. We are simply working a single crochet into the next stitch to begin every single row. So this is working in the round. I'm going to work over top of my little short tail. You don't have to, you can weave it in later. If you have trouble keeping track of the first row of each of the rounds, you might want to use a stitch marker just to plunk it on the top of the first stitch of each row, just so you don't have to worry about counting as much. You can focus more on the multiples, and you'll know when you've gotten back round to the beginning. It'll look something like this. For row 2, we are working 2 single crochet in every single stitch all the way around. So we start by working 2 single crochet into that first stitch of row 1. That first stitch is always a little tight. 2 single crochet in the same stitch. If you're going to use a stitch marker before you continue on, mark the first of those 2 stitches, that's the first stitch of row 2, and you'll know where you are when you get back around to it. 2 stitches in each one of those single crochet all the way around. We're going to go from having 8 stitches at the end of row 1 to having 16 stitches at the end of row 2. At the end of row 2, I have 16 single crochet all the way around. That's 2 single crochet in each stitch from row 1. I know I'm back at the beginning because I marked my first stitch with a stitch marker, and if I count them up, I know I have 16 stitches. Row 3, we're still increasing, and we're going to work directly into that first stitch of row 2. 2 single crochet in that first stitch to begin. And before I leave, I'm going to mark that first stitch with my stitch marker because I know that's the very beginning of the row. Single crochet once into the next stitch, and then the rest of the pattern is 2 single crochet, 1 single crochet, 2 single crochet, 1 single crochet, all the way around. And we're going to go from 16 single crochet at the end of row 2 all the way up to 24 at the end of row 3. At the end of row 3, you'll have 24 stitches, and we're back at the beginning where my stitch marker is. Row 4, we're still increasing. We're going to go from 24 stitches up to 32, and the new pattern is 2 single crochet into the first stitch, and a single crochet into each of the next 2. So 2, 1, 1, 2, 1, 1, all the way around. Same thing, work the first 2 stitches into that first stitch from the previous row. Grab your stitch marker, mark that first stitch so you know where the beginning of the row is when you get back around to it. And then single crochet once into each of the next 2 stitches. 2 single crochet, 1 single crochet, 1 single crochet. Repeat that all the way around, and I'll catch back up with you at the stitch marker. At the end of row 4, we are up to 32 stitches all the way around. And for row 5, we're going to do one final row of increasing. We're going to go from 32 stitches all the way up to 40. And the new pattern for increasing is 2 single crochet into the next stitch, followed by a single crochet into each of the next 3 stitches. So same thing as the previous rows. We're going to work the first 2 single crochet of the new row into that first stitch of the previous row. Mark that first stitch with the stitch marker. We follow that up with now 3 single crochets, 1 in each of those 3 stitches. So 2, 1, 1, 1, and then we repeat. 2 single crochet in the next stitch, followed by a single crochet in each of the next 3 stitches. Repeat that all the way around, and I'll catch up with you in a minute. At the end of row 5, we have 40 stitches. And we're just going to do a little bit of finishing here. This is the end of the increasing, but because every time you increase a row when you're working in the round, you end up moving back a stitch. So the beginning of your row moves back a stitch every time you increase. And you can tell because this is row 1 here in the middle, and you can see where it turns into that little bump. That's row 2 starting. And here's where our last stitch of our last row is. So you can see that we've kind of moved back a bit. So all we're going to do, just to even out that circle, is single crochet into each of the next 5 stitches. This isn't going to change the stitch count, it's just going to even up that circle. So that's single crochet into each of the next 5. And that basically aligns the last stitch of the row with where we started. So that just evens out the circle a bit more. Okay, let's slip stitch into the next stitch. It just finishes off row 5 nice and neatly. And now for row 6, we're not increasing, but we are going to work a post stitch all the way around, and that's going to create a nice firm bottom for our basket to sit on. We're going to be sort of single crocheting around the back of each stitch post all the way around. And the nice thing about working with this big yarn and a big hook is that it's a lot easier to see. So here we go. To single crochet around the back of a post of a stitch, you are going to take your hook, insert it into the next stitch right here from the other side. So it's kind of like going backwards. You're going to come from back to front through the next stitch, take your hook, poke it through the stitch next to that from front to back, and there is the post of the stitch popped up on your hook. And you can see it there against that gold hook. Then you just single crochet as normal. And that first little stitch might be a little difficult, so just take your time. Now, the stitch where you went back out becomes the next place that you bring your hook in. So you bring your hook back, from back to front, from front to back through the next stitch, and that pops that post up on your hook there, and then you single crochet around that post by bringing a loop back through both of those stitches and then single crocheting as normal. Let's do one more. We just went back through this one, so we come from back to front through that, front to back through the next one, there's the post, and single crochet. Slow down, take it easy. Working post stitches is something that kind of you get used to. But what it does is it takes this part of the stitch from row 5 and pushes it down. So you get this really nice stitch edging that's going to sit on the bottom of the basket. And you're going to get a nice vertical edge of a stitch that sits the rest of the basket up. So instead of having just a rounded bottom that's going to maybe flatten, you're going to have a firmer edge around the bottom of your basket, which will give it more of a basket shape. So all you're going to do is just find the post of the next stitch by working first your hook back to front through one stitch and then front to back through the neighboring stitch. You're still going to have 40 stitches all the way around. And if you have trouble keeping track of where you're at, you can always continue to use that stitch marker by putting it on the first stitch of the row so that you know when you get all the way back around, you've got one more post to go before you are back at the beginning. Just take your time and I'll catch up with you back at the stitch marker. At the end of row 6, you're going to have possibly a bit of a scrunchy looking bottom, but that's okay. The whole point of this post row is going to create a flat bottom, and if it tightens things up a little bit, that's good, because as your basket gets used, it will flatten out. And now you've got the inside of a basket. You've got a firm little ridge for the basket to sit on, and this becomes the outside of the very bottom of the basket. You still have 40 stitches all the way around. We're not joining the row. We are going to continue in the very first stitch of row 6 for the first stitch of row 7. And now you're just single crocheting in every single stitch all the way around. And it might help to continue to use that stitch marker. I put it on the first stitch of the row so I know that I've done a full row, and if I'm keeping count by sort of marking it off with a pen and paper, or maybe I'm keeping track on my phone or something, I can just sort of tap off another row before I start another one, and it just helps to kind of keep count. And then you can really see that nice edge. So there's the bottom ridge, and now the first row of just plain single crochet sits directly on top of it. It's a really nice way to create some definition for your basket. Let's get row 7 of just straight single crochet squared away, and then we'll talk the rest of the rows. At the end of row 7, you should still have 40 stitches, and you will continue to have 40 stitches for the rest of this basket build. And now you can really see that defined bottom flat edge for the basket. It's really coming together nicely. For rows 8 through 16, you're just going to single crochet in every single stitch around. If you want a slightly taller basket, you can work up to 18 rows. If you want a slightly shorter basket, you can work up to 14 rows. The number of rows will not affect the basket pattern, but just keep in mind that the taller you go, the more wobbly their basket edges might get. So I recommend anywhere between 14 and 18 rows of just straight single crochet. You'll still have 40 stitches at the end of every row. I do recommend keeping that little stitch marker activated so that you always know where the start of your row is. And I will see you at the end of row 16. I've reached the end of row 16. I'm back at the beginning where my little stitch marker is. You can also tell because there's that little tiny jog where we started that post row. 16 rows will come to about 5 inches in height. A couple rows less will be around 4.25 inches, and a couple rows more to row 18 would be about 5 3/4 inches. Or 5 inches is 12.5 centimeters. So that's the size that I'm going for. We've got one more row to do, so whether you end at row 16, row 18, or row 14, we're going to take our final row and just slip stitch in each stitch all the way around. So try not to be too tight, but try not to be too loose. The whole point of slip stitching in every single stitch all the way around is that we create a firm bit of strength for the top of our basket. It just gives it a little bit of an edge, and it helps it stay upright. It helps it keep its shape, especially when we have the lid on it later. When you get all the way back around to the beginning, you're just going to slip stitch into that first slip stitch you made and fasten off. You can take out your stitch marker. And then I like to pull that tail through to the inside of the basket and weave it in on the inside. And that just sort of makes that little edging disappear. I'm going to weave it in underneath some of these stitches from the previous row of single crochet, not the previous row of slip stitch. So just below that row of slip stitch. Weave it in first in one direction, and then double back and going in the other direction. And that should want to keep it in place. There we go. And that little bit of ridging, that slip stitch row, gives it just a little bit more shape and some strength, and of course it stands up nice and tall. All right, let's make it a little lid, shall we? Our lid is going to start very much the same way that the basket did. We're going to begin with a cinch circle. We're going to chain 1 to secure the circle and single crochet 8 into that circle. So exactly the same way that row 1 began for our basket, we're going to do the same thing here for the lid. Once you have 8 single crochet worked into that cinch circle, just like row 1 of the basket, you're going to take your short tail, cinch it shut nice and tight, and instead of immediately going into increase rows, we're actually going to create a little bit of a knob so that we can grab the top of our basket and pull it off and put it on when we want to. So into that first stitch from row 1,
we're going to single crochet into it, but we're only going to single crochet once into each stitch all the way around. So I'm going to work that first single crochet of my second row, and I'm going to mark it with my stitch marker. I'm going to work over top of my short tail. You don't have to, you can just leave it to the inside and weave it in later if you want. But we're going to single crochet in each stitch all the way around, so we're still going to have 8 stitches at the end of row 2. And that is going to eventually make your crochet want to roll in on itself. So you want to push it out so that the side facing you initially is the outside of your little basket lid. So that's all 8 stitches in row 2. And now you should have a very large hat for your index finger. We're going to do one more row of single crochet in each stitch all the way around. So we're still not joining our rows. We're just working the first stitch of each row into what was the first stitch of the previous row. I'm going to mark that first stitch of the row with my stitch marker. Single crochet into each of those 8 stitches all the way around. And just like the basket, I'm trying to keep my tension nice and tight because I want this to be a firm little grab. I want this stitching to be tight enough so that when I grab that little knob, it doesn't squish too much in my fingers. So nice firm little knob. There we go. So that's 3 rows of single crochet, no increasing. So that's the little knob for the top of our basket. Okay, for row 4 and onwards, it's going to be the same increasing pattern that we did for the bottom of the basket. So now, row 4 is the same as row 2 of the basket. We're going to work 2 single crochet into each stitch all the way around. We're going to go from 8 single crochet up to 16. I'm going to keep track of that first stitch of the row so that I can pay more attention to my increase number and less attention to where I am in the circle. So 2 single crochet in each stitch all the way around. I'll catch up with you again at the stitch marker. At the end of row 4, you'll have 16 stitches, and it's going to start flaring out now. Row 5 is the same as row 3 of the basket bottom. We begin with 2 single crochet in the next stitch. I'm going to mark that first stitch of the row with my stitch marker, followed by 1 single crochet in the next stitch. So 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, all the way around, and we're going from 16 single crochet all the way up to 24. At the end of row 5, you're going to have 24 stitches all the way around. Row 6, we are continuing our little increase pattern. We're going to work the first 2 single crochet of the row into the next stitch, and I'm going to mark the first one with my stitch marker. So that's 2 single crochet in the first stitch and a single crochet in each of the next 2 stitches. 2, 1, 1, 2, 1, 1, all the way around, and that will bring us up to 32 stitches in total at the end of row 6. At the end of row 6, we're up to 32 stitches. We've got a couple more rows of increasing left to go. So for row 7, we are going to continue our little increase pattern. We're going to begin with 2 single crochet in the first stitch. I'm going to mark that stitch with my stitch marker. So that's 2 single crochet in the first stitch, followed by a single crochet in each of the next 3 stitches. 2, 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 1, 1, all the way around. That'll bring us up to 40, and then we've got one more row of increasing after that. That was the end of row 7. we're up to 40 stitches. We've got one more row of increasing now to do. Same sort of pattern. We're going to begin the row with 2 single crochet in the first stitch. I'm going to mark that first stitch. And now it's a single crochet in each of the next 4 stitches. So 2 single crochet into, I didn't want to skip one there, 2 single crochet into the first stitch, single crochet into each of the next 4 stitches. That will bring us up to 48 stitches. And then we're going to do another little row of post stitches, but in the opposite direction. So 2, 1, 1, 1, 1. 2 single crochet followed by a single crochet in each of the next 4 stitches. That is the last row of increase, and I'll catch up with you back at the stitch marker. At the end of row 8, you may have something that's starting to ripple like this, but it will at least look like a jar lid. Don't worry, we are going to fix the little ripple, and we are going to turn it into more of a lid shape so that it will fit on top of our basket. But first, let's single crochet into each of the next 6 stitches. So this is just going to even up the circular edge of our lid, and it won't change your stitch count. Okay, and now we're going to work a row of back post single crochet just like we did on the basket bottom. So instead of having 40 single post or single crochet around the post stitches, we're going to have 48. We'll just slip stitch into the next stitch to start. And remember, the back post single crochet is you bring your hook from the back to the front through the next stitch, and then from the front to the back through the stitch after that, and single crochet as normal. That first one might be a little tight, so just take your time. And then you can sort of see the space where you left off. And we go from back to front, and from front to back, and single crochet around the post. And we're going to do that all the way around. And I recommend, just so you can focus more on working those back post single crochets, put a little stitch marker on the first one you made so that you know where the beginning of the row is when you get it back around to it. Once you're all the way back around and you've done 48 back post single crochets, you can take out that little stitch marker, and it's just 2 rows now of straight single crochet. So each row will have 48 stitches in it. I still recommend putting that stitch marker on the first stitch of the row. There we go. There was no joining that row, you're just going to single crochet directly into the first stitch of the previous row. So 2 rows now of straight single crochet. This is just going to curl our little basket lid down the edge a bit, so it's got a little something to sort of sit on top of the basket. And then we've got 1 row of finishing ahead of us, and we'll be all done. That was rows 10 and 11. So row 9 was our back post single crochet row, and then we worked rows 10 and 11 just straight single crochet all the way around. You still have 48 stitches in each row. And now we're going to do, just like we did to finish off the basket, we're going to do a row of slip stitch all the way around. And this, once again, creates a stiffer edge for the basket lid. It'll give it a little more strength and framing, and it will help keep it in place when we put it on top of our basket. So slip stitch in each stitch all the way around. You can continue to use that little stitch marker just so you know where the first stitch of the row is. And then you don't have to count. You can just pay attention to slip stitching. When you've finished slip stitching in every single stitch all the way around and you're back to the beginning, just slip stitch into that first slip stitch you made, and it might be tight, and that's okay. And then you can fasten off and weave in the tail. So I'm going to pull that tail through to the inside of the basket lid, just like I did with the basket, and then weave it in back and forth across the inside edge of the basket lid, I should say. All that's left to do after you've woven in your tails, and make sure you get that one in here if you didn't work over top of it as you were crocheting like I did, is just give your basket lid a little bit of form. All of those post stitches plus the slip stitching will help to give it a little bit more framing that maybe it wouldn't normally have. And then all that's left to do is use it on top of your basket. It looks a little bit like an acorn.
And that little basket is super useful. I like the added bit of stitching we gave it at the top. It really does help give it a little bit more strength. And the same thing with the basket lid. And of course it fits together nice and neat and tidy. I really am considering making a whole bunch to have sort of on my shelves to keep all of my odds and ends in. I think whenever you get into a hobby like crochet or knitting or really anything, you tend to collect a lot of little things. You have scrap yarn, maybe you have scrap fabric, you've got stitch markers and extra tools and measuring tapes and maybe extra little balls of yarn, and sometimes trying to find a place to keep all the little things can be a little bit overwhelming, and they wind up all of them cluttered together in maybe a larger container. So sometimes having a very pretty, decorative storage option that's also small is exactly what you need for all of those little things. Thank you again to Lion Brand Yarns for sponsoring today's video. I really did enjoy working with this thick and quick woolies, and we'll see you soon here on the Jayda and Stitches show. Until then, stay safe, stay crafty, get organized, and have a great week. Bye everyone!
Hi everybody, Mr. InStitches here. Thank you for watching today. Here are some of our other videos you might be interested in. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe.